Aloha, welcome to the Mr.G podcast. It is Saturday, February 17th, 11/11. Make a wish. I'm coming to you from Honolulu, Hawaii, on the outskirts of Chinatown, where it's 73 degrees. Like I said, 11/11, make a wish. I wish this podcast gets a billion views and listens across all platforms. Today, we're going to continue talking about what we were talking about yesterday. Today is episode number 31 of season 2 of the Mr. G Hawaii podcast, the Gregory Brandt podcast. On yesterday's episode, we talked about generations, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, the greatest generations, the silent generation, and of course, the notorious Gen X. I was going to say the alpha of the generations, but I didn't want to confuse you with Gen Alpha, which is the name of anybody being born now and in the next 5 years and in the last 5 years, the previous 5 years. I don't normally like labels. It starts in high school, that kid's a stoner, that kid's a skater, that kid's a jock, that kid's a nerd. I don't like giving individuals labels because it limits them. I mentioned that in my first book, Gonzo Education. However, these generations that we're talking about, they're objective labels. They're the year that you were born. And today's episode, we're going to talk about Gen X. One of the comments I received on one of the clips, the AI clips of yesterday's podcast, was somebody from Gen Z or millennial. They're like, talk shit about your own generation. Stop talking bad about us. We're going through enough already. And it was kind of funny because it met the stereotype of millennials overreacting and being stressed out. And I got to thinking about that. Okay, that's fair enough. What are some criticisms of Gen X? And I was sat there in the shower trying to think of criticisms of Gen X, and I couldn't really. All the TikTok memes of the generations, they all joke about how Gen Z can't get a date. The millennials are hiding under their beds, and boomers don't know how to plug in a phone. And so, what is the criticisms of Gen X? That's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do so, I want to talk about somebody that I found out about yesterday, Sean Strickland. He's a professional MMA fighter, and I am not an MMA fan. I can't watch it. I am a sports fan, but MMA is something that I just never been able to get into. Even living in Hawaii, where it's extremely popular, I cannot wrap my head around it. And anytime I've tried to watch it, my mind just drifts off. MMA is not something that I'm a fan of, or that I encourage or that I watch. But this individual, Sean Strickland, I just saw him. He came up on different social media, he does social media, he does a podcast, and I saw him boxing, sparring with a well-known influencer, Skilo, or something or another. And the guy, Sean Strickland, was twice his size and kind of just messing with him. And then I saw Sean Strickland talk smack to Machine Gun Kelly, which was cool. And then I just saw him on a press thing, and I just went down the Sean Strickland rabbit hole. And I'm like, who is this guy? This guy is a badass. And apparently, he was a totally different person, 5 or 10 years ago. And he was in a serious motorcycle accident. And it reminded me of the notorious accident Bob Dylan was in, where it just changes his personality. And there's many stories of that, where somebody suffers a head injury through a motorcycle accident and they become a totally different person, or it's a surprising change in their personality. And you can see the total difference from before the accident, after the accident. But what struck me as awesome is just how he spoke his mind, and a lot of his opinions many people would not agree with, and would say that you can't even say that type of stuff nowadays. But freedom of speech is my number one issue. And when Andrew Tate came out a while ago, I looked into him a little bit, Andrew Tate. I'm like, oh, okay. Like many people, I found out about Andrew Tate after he was banned on all different social medias. And one joke that's a Gen Z joke that stands in my mind was a meme where they were like, "Look, Andrew Tate is banned on settings," and then they had the Apple settings icon. And I just like think about that joke a lot because I also read a statistic that like 9 out of 10 American teenagers have an iPhone. And that was so surprising. 9 out of 10. I mean, I know iPhones are popular among young people, but I didn't know they're that popular. Not every teenager has an iPhone 15, but they have some iPhones. Some of them are carrying around iPhone 6s and iPhone 7s, I guess. But 9 out of 10 have some sort of iPhone. That's amazing. But back to Andrew Tate. So I was like, okay, and this Andrew Tate guy, a lot of things that he says are positive, like taking responsibility for your actions and working on and setting and achieving goals. But also, Andrew Tate, a lot of it just comes off as phony, and somebody that knows better knows that this isn't the type of person that grew up, uh, that has experiences that can, you know, teach about being a man or being a tough individual. Sean Strickland is the opposite. When you see Sean Strickland, you can tell this person has been through some shit. You see Sean Strickland talk about his father. He's like, yeah, my father was an asshole. And I'm like, oh, that's rare. My father was an asshole too. Rarely do you have somebody that's being listened to by other people. Thank you for listening to the Mr. G Hawaii podcast or watching it right now. Rarely do they say, oh, my father was a son of a bitch. My father was an asshole. Normally, if you're in that position that have people listening to you, your father was a decent person. That's like one of the number one predecessors for success is having a father in your life. The majority of people in prison did not have fathers in their lives. So you can tell Sean Strickland has been through some shit, unlike Andrew Tate, where you could see it's all a facade, where Andrew Tate's not the real deal. He has a high pitched voice. He's not a really tough dude, really. He's a real phony guy. He reminds me of the character Tom Cruise played in one of my favorite movies, Magnolia. And if you haven't seen Magnolia, it's an awesome film, and it's Tom Cruise's best role. Tom Cruise is like an infomercial uh, womanizer guru, and he teaches men how to womanize and take advantage of women. And and it's like Andrew Tate based his character on this Magnolia character because you can just see how phony it is. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, Andrew Tate is a normal straight man. And yes, Andrew Tate is tough, and Andrew Tate could kick my ass. He's a professional fighter. And oh, I wouldn't say this to Andrew Tate's face. Yes, I would if he, wouldn't fight me. If my words didn't hurt him so much. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words would never hurt me. You know, the same way like Sean Strickland is intimidating. That's why like I think like, oh, I wouldn't ever be friends with somebody like Sean Strickland, but he actually is one of the rare people that I would be friends with. But he would be one of the rare people that I would be friends with that is also a killer. Very few people I would be friends with. Elon Musk, Sean Strickland, Spidey, that guy from the Y Tales. I think on YouTube channel that does the show with the little goldfish, the Y Files. I think the five of us should go on an expedition and go find the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. Uh, Sean Strickland will be the resident tough man. Spidey will be the comic relief. I'll be the captain, and Elon will be the funds of the journey and also the leader. I'll be the captain and he'll be the leader. How about that? And we'll have a really fun and great trip recovering the Ark of the Covenant. But Sean Strickland, yeah, he seems like a really awesome dude, and it makes me want to watch his next fight on MMA, even though I'm totally not an MMA fan. One thing that I tweeted, I followed all of him on social media because he does like social media. Obviously, when he's done fighting, he's going to continue his career with podcasting and whatnot. And one thing I tweeted yesterday was uh, Sean Strickland is the man Andrew Tate wishes that he was. And I really like that. And it does, it's a funny tweet, but it's also accurate. And I actually got that from a tweet that I read that said Radiohead is the band Coldplay wishes that they were. So Now, Sean Strickland is the man Andrew Tate wishes that he was. And uh, Radiohead is the band Coldplay wishes that they were. So, it'd be funny. I can picture, SNL doing a parody of Andrew Tate, and he's like, "I'm tough, and this is what you got to do." And he's all in front of the camera. Then they're like, "Cut," and then he comes off, and he's like a flamboyant gay guy. He's like, "Oh, thank you. How did I do? Oh, you did so well." His brother's really like his gay partner. He's like, "Oh, you did so well. Let me powder your face." Like, and he's like, "Oh, that's so thank you, thank you, thank you." You know, I don't need to know much about Andrew Tate, but one thing is, like I said, when he first came out, I was like, oh, okay, freedom of speech. And I supported a lot of things they said. But then I did the litmus test, which is, okay, what does he think about cats? All right. And so I go, Andrew Tate cats. And then he has this thing. He's like, oh, cats aren't cool. I'm a tough guy. And tough guys don't like cats. Every time you see a guy petting a cat, it's just not cool. You know, and it's uh, like screw you, dude. And then after I was looking up Sean Strickland yesterday, I'm like, okay, Sean Strickland, he sounds like a really awesome dude. Let's see what he says about cats. And I was like, Sean Strickland, cats. And then it says Sean Strickland, comes out and criticizes Hasbullah of cat abuse video. And Hasbullah is like that little midget that was popular on Instagram and social media. Oh, a little person, not midget. And he's like popular in the MMA, and he's always like fighting. He's like a little guy, and he's like all cute, and he's like 30 years old, but he looks like he's like 10. And he's been on all these different talk shows and stuff. But this video came out of him literally abusing a cat, and not many people came out to say anything bad about Hasbullah because he's so well loved. But Sean Strickland, with the did not give a fuck attitude, was like, no, that's fucked up. You don't fucking hurt a little cat. That's one of the worst things that you could do is hurt an animal or whatever he did. He came out and spoke out about it. And any person that does that is a okay and a okay in my book. So he got the litmus check of approval. And so that's what, even though Sean Strickland is a killer, he's one of the only killers I would ever be friends with. So shout out to Sean Strickland. He's an awesome dude. All right. So negative stereotypes of Gen X. All right. Gen X, as I was talking about, they're considered highlight, but some things about Gen X, they're known as bleak, cynical, and disaffected. And that's kind of the summary of the 90s. When you look at the popular music of the 90s, when I grew up in the 90s, I was born in 1979, so I'm at the very end of Gen X. But during the 90s, it was cool to be uncool. Bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden, and it was cool to be depressed and weary and dreary. And that's something that's unlike other generations. Financial pressure from the rising cost of higher education and healthcare, as well as ballooning student loan balances, have weighed heavily. They're known as the nihilistic generation, or Gen Xers are the first slacker generation, as Richard Linklater's comedic and essentially plotless 1991 film Slacker. If somebody asked me what my favorite movie is, as a good answer is Slacker, Richard Linklater's first film. My first book, Gonzo Education, takes place in the same area as the Richard Linklater's film Slacker, around the University of Texas campus off of Guadalupe Street. And that movie is free on YouTube, Richard Linklater's film Slacker, his very first movie. So watch it right now. People would portray them as the fringe generation rather than self-involved. But Gen Xers are, like I said, apathetic. Another movie is Ben Stiller's 1994 film Reality Bites. It sought to capture the zeitgeist of the generation with portrayal of the attitudes and lifestyle choices of the time. Negative stereotypes of Gen X young adults continued, including that they were bleak, cynical, and disaffected. In 1998, such stereotypes prompted socialist research at Stanford to study the accuracy of the characterization of Gen X young adults as cynical and disaffected. The researchers compared answers to identical survey questions asked of 18 to 29-year-olds in 3 different time periods. Additionally, they compared how older adults answered the same survey questions over time. The surveys showed 18 to 29-year-old Gen Xers did exhibit higher levels of cynicism and disaffection than previous cohorts. not just young adult males, making this period effect a cohort effect of the entire generation. A lot of people call Gen X the sandwich generation because they came after baby boomers and before millennials. So Gen Xers were old enough to use technology, but they weren't old enough to appreciate it, maybe. What do other people think of Gen X? Gen Xers are typically described as resourceful and independent, traits partly stemming from the latchkey childhood, as well as keen on maintaining work-life balance, perhaps due to the witnessing the demands of their parents' work and subsequent absence from family life. So Gen Xers are the generation that are known to have latchkey, meaning that they had their parents were always at work and they had a key around their neck. And Gen Xers were known to just be gone from morning until night, and even after that, sometimes all night, and riding the bikes all around the city or wherever you're in the country or wherever you lived, drinking from garden hoses, lighting off firecrackers, using slingshots, whatever you could come up with. But in the workplace, like I said, they're described as very resourceful and independent. They also are known to have an easygoing approach. In fact, 79% of Gen X say they've forgotten in the workplace, overshadowed by younger millennials and Gen Z, and also older workers, boomers. Like I said, they're known as the sandwich generation. The boomers, they're the oldest generation that are around, basically, that are still working. And Gen Xers may find it difficult to relate to different priorities and goals of both their older and younger colleagues, potentially leading to feelings of isolation and disconnection. Along with practicality, skepticism plays a significant role in how Gen X views the world. This generation's formative years were marked by significant shifts in political and social norms, leading to a cautious approach to institutions and authority. So, like I said, there's Gen X are known to be distrusting of authority and institutions. Expenses and competing financial needs pile on for Gen X while they're also in their key wealth building years. Gen Xers are most likely generation to say money has a negative impact on their mental health as they juggle working and caregiving. And when you look at that, the baby boomers are supposedly had the previous generation had it the best, where they were able to take advantages, at least in the United States, of World War II and having the best economy that ever existed. You could work at a fast food restaurant and afford a house if you were part of the baby boomer generation. The very next generation, Gen X, not the case, not the case at all. Why are Gen Xers depressed? Well, Sarah Miller of the New York Times wrote a really great article, and I'll just read part of it, the first paragraph. I was born in 1969, and I have feelings about generations. They include what leads millions of people of us to see The Notebook so many times and then to complain about having done so. Why are we having a conversation about whether it's okay to pull out your phone during a movie in a theater? Because there is only one answer to this question, and it is no way. And punching older, why is Eric Clapton on tour and Sinead O'Connor and Kurt Cobain are dead? All right, so we'll skip her, but there are other terminology. The main generations, the silent generation, there are a few left. The greatest generation. The greatest generation came before the silent generation. The silent generation is 1926 to 1945. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. Gen X, what we covered today, 1965 to 1980. Millennials, 1981 to 1996. Zoomers, Gen Z, 1997 to 2012. And Gen Alpha, 2010s to mid 2020s. Now, there are other generations that are inside these generations. So the Beat generation refers to popular cultural movement, Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, famous writers of the counterculture of the 1960s. And it consisted of Americans born between the two world wars who came of age at the rise of the automobile era and the surrounding accessibility they brought to the cultural diverse yet geographically broad and separated nation. One of my favorite books is On the Road by Jack Kerouac. It was shortly after all the freeways were built across the mainland United States, um, or a few of the freeways were built during that time, Eisenhower. And uh, that book is about Jack Kerouac and 3 different trips he took driving across the United States. It's probably the best road trip book you could ever buy. Generation Jones is a term coined by Jonathan Pontel to describe the cohort of people born between 1954 and 1965, primarily in English-speaking countries. The MTV generation, a term referring to adolescents and young adults of the 1980s and 1990s. Gen X would refer to the MTV generation, and it's often used synonymously. In Europe, a variety of terms depending on different political movements. Now, I was born in '79 on the cusp of Gen X, and when I graduate college till I was 30 in 2010. And I went to college with all millennials. When I taught high school, I taught all Gen Z. So personally, even though I'm officially Gen X, born in late 1979, seeing my 2 older sisters who are twins, they're 4 years older than me, they're definitely Gen X. But having spent 7 years in college, all with millennials, I feel like, part of both generation, and there's actually a term for that. I was calling it a Xennial. It's spelled Xennials. So I'm just going to call it an Xennial. An Xennial, Oregon Trail generation. Do you remember the Oregon Trail? And Generation Catalano are terms used to describe individuals born during Generation X/millennial cusp years. Xennials is a portmanteau blending the words Generation X and millennials to describe a micro generation of people born between the late 1970s to early 1980s. That would be me, the double dare generation, the slime, you can't do that on television generation. Put something in the comments if you remember Double Dare or you can't do that on television. Now, the reason I'm pronouncing it Xennial, Xennials, is because I learned there's another term called Zillennials, Zillennials. And this is known as the Snapchat generation or Minion Z, are terms to describe individuals born during the millennial generation. Z cusp years, Zillennials, is a portmanteau blending the words millennials and Gen Z to describe a micro generation of people born from the early 1990s to early 2000s. So, what do you guys think? What generation are you? I appreciate your listening. The Mr. G podcast, Mr. G Hawaii podcast, the Gregory Brandt podcast. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with a friend. And thank you for listening. Have a great day. Come back tomorrow for a new episode. We'll go over criticisms of boomers. You're going down, boomers. Tomorrow, you're going down, boomers. Boomers going down tomorrow, guys. Aloha.